My name is Emma Snape, Special Event and Program Manager for the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage. On behalf of everyone at the museum, welcome to our virtual program, Virtual Gallery Talk, Stephen Wiesenfeld on Weinberger versus Wiesenfeld. This program is inspired by our newest special exhibition, Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, presented locally by PNC Bank. There will be time for your Q&A at the end of the program. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please send them in the chat to all panelists or through the Q&A feature, and I'll compile them to ask Stephen at the end of the program. Before we get started, I'd like to thank PNC and to all of our sponsors and partners, including the ACLU of Ohio and the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center, who helped make it possible to bring a first of its kind exhibition like this one to Cleveland, and to offer unique programming like we're offering you tonight with Stephen Wiesenfeld. I'm so glad that you've connected with us already and that you could be here tonight for part of our Gallery Talk series, where we join together for conversations discussing objects in the Notorious RBG Gallery, followed each time by an audience Q&A. In today's program, Stephen Wiesenfeld tells his own story. Stephen Wiesenfeld met and married Paula Palatschek when he was in his mid to late 20s. A little more than 2 years later, Paula died during childbirth, leaving behind a healthy son, Jason. Stephen applied for Social Security benefits, but found that only widows were entitled to a benefit. He and Ruth Bader Ginsburg found each other and brought a suit before the United States Supreme Court. The landmark 8-0 decision catapulted Ruth to fame and eventually to a seat on the United States Supreme Court. All this time, from 1972 until her death in 2020, Stephen and Ruth remained friends, communicating often and meeting for events, including officiating at his son Jason's marriage. Ruth Bader Ginsburg also officiated at Stephen's wedding when he remarried. Since the United States Supreme Court ruling, in addition to his very successful consulting business, Stephen has given interviews and does presentations and TV appearances. He's helped many authors with writing their books, and he also appeared in the movie RBG. And now, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Stephen to the virtual stage. Thank you, Stephen.
Hello, everybody. I'm talking to you, but unable to see you and unable to hear you. So I want to thank you for joining with me tonight. The item number one is coming up on the screen for you to be able to look at. That's a picture of Ruth and me. Okay, here it comes. That's a picture of Ruth and me. At this particular point, this is from Asheville, North Carolina, where I have my summer home, and she came to Asheville to visit, and this was in 2007. So I'm going to break this program into two quick parts at the beginning. One is I'm going to give you a little more information about me and who I am. Then I'm going to talk about how things were 49 and 50 years or so ago when the case was originally brought before the courts. And then I'm going to start with how Ruth and I met, and then we're going to go from that point. So a couple of things that you want to know is that the laws in the United States were written up to the time of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that usually favored a stereotypical gender. Males worked, they brought home money. Females stayed home, they raised children, and they cleaned the house. And that's what most of the laws, 90% of the laws that were written favored that particular pigeonholing. So Ruth is gonna just talk for a moment. When she's talking to, at this particular point, she's talking to Jeffrey Toobin, who is head of the Constitutional Law Center in Philadelphia. And she's going to describe something that Emma just described to you, exactly what happened. But it's interesting to hear her voice. And this little clip just is a minute and a half long. So this little clip is number two.
After Sharon Frontiero, Stephen Wiesenfeld became one of my favorite clients. His story is also, his story is heartrending. He was a young man married to a woman who was a teacher in the high school. She became pregnant. It was a very healthy pregnancy. She went to the hospital to give birth, and the doctor came out and told Stephen, "You have a healthy baby boy, but your wife died of an embolism." So at that moment, he vowed that he would not work full-time until his child was in school full-time. And he figured out that with Social Security benefits plus part-time earnings, he could just about make it. He would be able to support himself and his child. He went to the Social Security office because he had heard about these child in care benefits for children under 12. And he's told, "Sorry, these benefits are not available to you. These are mother's benefits." This was in the early 70s. And Stephen wrote a letter to the editor of his local newspaper.
All right, so I hope that you have a little understanding of what the case is about. This is some people, when they first read about it, they think that what I was doing the Social Security benefit, which is what I was going to do, but this is really a woman's rights case. Here you have a woman that's working 7 years as a school teacher, paying benefits into the Social Security system, and it did not go to support her family when she passed away. A similarly situated male earning the same amount of money, paying money into the Social Security system, if he should have passed away, there would be a benefit that would accrue to his spouse. And this also a prerequisite is that there has to be a child involved here, so that they take a mother's insurance benefit is what it's called. So meanwhile, you have a working woman who is adding to society and paying money into the Social Security system and getting nothing for it. And then you have a woman who was staying home raising her child and was not contributing productively to the system, to the financial system, and she is entitled to receive money from Social Security. So it's a double-edged sword, and Ruth was going to point that out and try and make things equal. Okay, so let's look at 5.1. This is something that was a news service called Democracy Now! And what I wanted to point out to you is that favorite client. So I'm going to refer to that a few times in this talk. I just wanted you to know that I was her favorite client, because that makes me feel good that I was. I was also her first client that was all her own. Clients that she had before me were from other law firms, and she was just added on as a consultant or amicus briefs or things like that. So like the case before mine that she did was Sharon Frontiero. Sharon Frontiero originally went to the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Ruth was later called in just to do the argument for them before the Supreme Court. Next, I'm going to have listened to a piece by Lauren Moxley. Lauren Moxley is an attorney in Washington, and she did a series of podcasts, and it's number 5.2, Will, and I'm just going to play this podcast for you, just for 30 seconds.
In the coming days, in honor of Ginsburg's memory. Today's episode, Not a Pedestal, but a Cage, covers Ginsburg's favorite case of her entire career. In this case, Ginsburg represents a man named Stephen Wiesenfeld, and Ginsburg believed that Stephen's case allowed her to drive home the point that certain laws that purport to benefit women actually perpetuate and reinforce stereotypes about.
All right, so let's just pointing out again that her favorite case. And here's her 5.3. This is a 38-second audio-visual thing where this gentleman is introducing Ruth to speak before the Duke Law School audience.
For us a talk on key decisions of the 2017 term, after which she will join me for a chat. Justice, welcome, and thank you once again for making this evening possible.
Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the presence of my favorite client, Stephen Wiesenfeld. and his wife, Elaine.
The next piece of audio is Jeffrey Toobin at CNN, who at the time was doing podcasts. I did a podcast with him, and this is a little 15-second clip from that. That's 5.4.
Looking at, Stephen, sorry to break it to you, but you're now part of history. You're not, and the history of this era has been written, and RBG's insight.
And after that, Poppy Harlow from CNN, I had met with her, and this is a little 10-second clip.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for being here. I've read about you for years and meeting you in the flesh, and those letters are fascinating. Thanks for bringing them.
Thank you.
Next, we'll speak with.
Okay, that's so. Okay, so at this, so that I have some credentials. All right, now I'm going to take you back when it was like 49 or 50 years ago. So you'll come with me now to these thrilling days of yesteryear, as they used to say before they put the Lone Ranger on. And let's see what life was like at the time that I brought this case. All right, slide 6. In the United States before 1970, an American woman could not keep her job if she was pregnant, could not report cases of sexual harassment in the workplace, could not be acknowledged in the Boston Marathon, could not get a credit card in her own name, could not refuse to have sex with her husband, could not compete as a boxer in the Olympics, could not get a divorce with some degree of ease, could not get a mortgage in her own name, could not have a legal abortion in most states. And we all know this list goes on, and women were actually second-class citizens and very repressed. So not knowing what to do about knowing this inequity in the law, I eventually wrote a letter to the editor of the New Brunswick Home News. I was living in Edison, New Jersey at the time, and New Brunswick Home News was the next town and the hometown newspaper. And they did a wire story that prompted me to be able to write a letter to the editor. And they're going to read this letter now. It's number 42, and the letter is 43.
To the editor. Your article about widowed men last week prompted me to point out serious inequality in the Social Security regulations. It's been my misfortune to discover that a male cannot collect Social Security benefits as a woman can. My wife and I assumed reverse roles. She taught for 7 years, the last 2 at Edison High School. She paid the maximum dollars into Social Security. Meanwhile, I, for the most part, played homemaker. Last June, she passed away while giving birth to our only child. My son can collect benefits, but because I am not a woman homemaker, I cannot receive those benefits. Had I been paying into Social Security and had I died, my wife would have been able to receive benefits, but male homemakers cannot. I wonder if Gloria Steinem knows about this.
All right, so the part where I said in that letter that I was playing homemaker is true, but I also was a partner in a consulting firm that was really sort of just starting out and just a couple of years old. And I was easily able to be at home and help raise Jason and work at the same time. Okay, so this letter was seen in the newspaper by a woman named Phyllis Boring, who taught at Rutgers University. Ruth also was teaching at Rutgers University at the time. Phyllis Boring sent me a letter and asking me if I would like to pursue this legally. And I actually said to her in a letter back that that's exactly why I wrote this letter, hoping somebody would come along and give me some direction as to how to pursue this. And she got in contact with somebody from the ACLU, which is actually a person that she knew because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was also teaching at Rutgers. And Ruth called me a couple of days later, and we talked on the phone for a little bit. And she said she's going to call back in a few weeks because she's preparing Frontiero for the court and needs to spend full time on that. So then what she did is she returned, in number 45, she returned a letter to me right there saying that, just indicating that some elements were actually so. She wanted to verify that Paula my name was Paula had passed away, that Paula was paying Social Security taxes for 7 years, and that I had custody of the dependent child, and that the child was receiving child and care benefits. Those 4 elements had to exist, and they did. So Ruth was very aware at the time that we were talking, but she did tell me that the case epitomized what she would call the double-edged sword of gender-based discrimination. The sword that, though it might seem to cut with a single edge against a single gender, males in this case, in reality cuts down both men and women. Ruth did not tell me that this was the first gender discrimination case at the Supreme Court that she would control from start to finish. As I mentioned before, most of all the cases that she had before were amicus briefs. So she's working very hard, and one night she was up all night, and the next day she was yet tired. Her son James was going to the Dalton School. At the Dalton School, he was very hyperactive, and Ruth just said that he was just an active little boy. So it was a private school, and there was an elevator, an old-fashioned elevator that needed somebody to control it. So you have to get into the elevator, and the man has to set the keys, close the door, and stuff like that. And on a dare, James decided to take the elevator to just up one flight of stairs to the second floor. And I know that many of you might have heard this story before. There's something new that I'm going to point out at the end. This story was written out about in several books. So the school called Ruth, who had been up all night writing the brief and was tired, and said, "Please come down and hear about your son's latest escapades." They called her about once every 2 weeks to come to school, and this time she rejected, being very tired at the time. And her response was, "This child has 2 parents. It's his father's turn. Please call him." So, the school was very reluctant to call a man who was working, and take him away from his work to come to school. Raising children was woman's work. Men went to work and earned money. But Ruth's husband, whose name was Marty, went to school and was told that James had stolen the elevator. Marty quickly responded, "Well, how far could he have taken it?" And that was the end of that incident. And Ruth says that James hadn't changed at all, but the calls to her were cut down to maybe 1 a semester. So what Ruth didn't know at the time, and what she just found out about 3 or 4 months before she passed away, was that the headmaster of that school, the man who she went to see all the time, was Donald Barr. And Donald Barr is the father of Donald Trump's Attorney General, William Barr. Connection, synchronicity in time. So the first filing in my case took place in February of 1973. And I have always, at that time, we experienced that if you're going to read about a case that is at the Supreme Court, or if you're going to read about a case that might have an interest on society, that you didn't really hear much about it until it went to court and there was a decision made. Somebody figured out that this case was of national significance right now. And the newspapers picked it up. As soon as the filing took place, newspapers picked it up and were calling me to do interviews. Lots of activity, lots of correspondence, lots of motion filings still taking place, and writing briefs. Okay, so we're going to go on to slide 51. And slide 51 is notice of a hearing that we're going to give. It was written June 1st, 1973, and it's saying that we need to appear before a 3-judge federal court in Trenton on June 20th. And she's going to take the train, and the person in New Jersey, Ruth was practicing in New York, the person in New Jersey got a copy of this letter as well as I did. The person, Jane, is Jane Lifset. That's the citation in the letter there. And on June 20th, Jason was 1 year and 15 days old when we were heading down to Trenton. And next slide 52, and this is what is taken about that time. But Jason was about just about 1 year old. That's me 50 years ago, 49 years ago. So my appearance in court wasn't required, but I was doing this mostly because I was very interested in the process, and I wanted to go to these court hearings and be involved in all the things that were going on. Ruth's arguments are always on target. She's very good at what she does. She answers questions quickly when the justices ask her questions. And she did a very good job in her presentation. The U.S. attorney made an argument that neither one of us was expecting, and actually it's a motion. He noted that in order to be in that three-judge federal court, that the remedy had to be more than $10,000. And the U.S. attorney argued that I would never be able to collect the remedy of $2,000 because men work and women stay home, and I would not be able to collect the Social Security benefit long enough to reach the $10,000 minimum. Social Security benefit that I was looking at was $206 a month. So I have to be out there for years before before my collections would have been up to $10,000. And at that particular time, when we filed, I was still working with my consulting business and not earning that much money. So it didn't make much of a difference. But I sold that business and because it wasn't doing that well enough for me to continue working at it. And I got a job, and it was paying about 10 times what Social Security would be paying me. And so they said, they use these arguments that why would I settle for $206 a month when I'm earning 10 times that? So I had this job when we went before the three-judge federal court, and that began to worry me that the case could be dismissed. But the three judges conferred for a second, and they decided that well, I could become unemployed, and we should continue right now. The justices then, the U.S. attorney then put another motion about the Equal Rights Amendment. There was an Equal Rights Amendment afoot at the time. And they said, well, if the Equal Rights Amendment passes, that this case would be already decided. But justices said the same thing. Well, the Equal Rights Amendment may not pass, and it didn't. And we still don't have an Equal Rights Amendment. And they said they'll put those motions aside and discuss them later. But right now, we're going to continue what we're doing because we're here and doing it. So I sort of had to reconcile for myself what so I had already planned out what my life's goals were and where I saw myself in 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And now the opportunity comes at hand because Jason needs a caregiving parent to help raise him. So if I continue on with this case, the first thing I have to do is lose the job I had. And so when I decided to do that, there goes the career track that I was on, and I just developed a new plan. So the most important thing was that I needed to control my income and take home less than $200 a month, which at the time was the maximum we were allowed to take home in order to continue to collect Social Security. It was very important to me that the case continue on. I was very interested in trying to right this wrong, that my wife had paid money into the Social Security system for 7 years and it had no benefit for her. That was like reducing her wages by that much money because it didn't do anything. The money that she was paying him didn't do anything. So I thought that a retail business would be a good thing to have because I can keep Jason in the store and I can control my income just by buying inventory. So that's what I had done. On December 12th, 1973, the three-judge federal court published a unanimous decision and ruled the Social Security laws as written were unconstitutional. We won a 3-0 decision, striking down the Social Security laws at that time. 1973, remember. The page one story appeared all over the country. My memory books have copies of people have sent me copies of these front pages from almost everywhere. Soon there were several feature stories in newspapers, magazines, and things like that as well. So Ruth took a vacation, and she was at a beach in Miami, put up 101. And if you can see in this letter that when it starts in the 4th line, the sentence that starts, I did, and Ruth is writing this letter to me, it says, I did manage one trip to nearby public beach where my purse was stolen from my locked parked car. Inconceivable that a former New Yorker would be so careless. Well, what do you think happened when she became a justice on the United States Supreme Court? She was just there during her first year. She and Marty moved to the Watergate, so she was living in Washington, and she and Marty decided to go out for a walk at 11 o'clock at night. And she was wearing one of these purses up over the shoulder. Somebody ran up from behind, knocked her down, took the purse and ran off. And so it happened the second time to her, which is not generally known that did. And the United States Marshals, usually she has, when she travels, she has 5 United States Marshals with her. And she was supposed to call them anytime she wants to leave her apartment. And 11 o'clock at night, she decided that she didn't need to call them. So they were angry with her and upset with her for not calling them, and counseled her to make sure that that she calls next time she wants to go out, and they will send somebody over to accompany her. So that was a little aside story. Here, and on slide 54 is a letter that I received from the Bill Moyers program, Bill Moyers News Hour. And Bill Moyers wanted to come out to New Jersey. This is before the 3-judge federal court ruled. It's still just not a ruling. They don't know what the ruling would be. This is in November of 1973. He wants to come out and do part of his. He had a 1-hour program on PBS, and he wanted to do a 15-minute segment with me. So he brought with him cameraman, a sound man, and a light man, and a producer. So there were 5 of them all together. And we talked at my house for a long period of time. And then somebody had the idea that they wanted to photograph me going to a store with Jason, who were everywhere with me on the back of my bicycle. But maybe see it on my bicycle, and Jason was going with me almost everywhere I went at this time. And they got into the car. I got on my bicycle. I was going to follow the car. I was going to go slowly, and they were going to photograph. And they didn't like what they were doing because they couldn't get a good picture from inside the car. So they decided to come outside the car, and the cameraman got on top of the car, and the sound man got on the almost flat trunk of the car. And when they started driving again, they were doing what they wanted to do. They were taking the pictures and listening to me make comments. And the police stopped them and said they're not allowed to be riding on the outside of the car. And they insisted they were allowed to be riding out there because they had a letter from Congress, who was sponsoring part of the program that they were filming. So the policemen took them off to court. They found a judge right away, and the judge told them not to do it anymore. They could not ride on the outside of the car. They met me again, and we finished the interviews and things like that. So that was an interesting story that would happen to a very famous newscaster, Bill Moyers. So and it was also very interesting that he came to my house and I was able to work with him. Okay, so the 3-judge federal court, we said they ruled 3-0. The district court gave Ruth Bader Ginsburg an unprecedented victory at 3-0. Not only did it rule in Wiesenfeld's favor, it went beyond precedent by saying that sex was inherently suspect and thus deserves strict scrutiny. I'm not going to explain to you what that actually means. It's a legal term. Strict scrutiny would just mean that it didn't have, well, I'm going to explain it to you. Strict scrutiny just meant that it does not have to go to court because it's obviously gender-based discrimination. And she tried to invoke that in her 2 former cases at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied strict scrutiny. Even though she won the cases, they denied strict scrutiny. And here, a 3-judge federal court below the Supreme Court is saying that it does deserve strict scrutiny. Her cases do deserve strict scrutiny. So that was an interesting topic, that the 3-judge federal court can actually ignore those rulings by the Supreme Court, that they didn't want to deal with that. Okay, so 56, Jason is being photographed. There's some pictures from the television show, and along comes at this particular time, it was 1973, and the Nixon impeachment trials were going on at that time. And the special prosecutor was Archibald Cox. Nixon didn't want to give him the tapes when they discovered those secret tapes that they had, and Cox insisted upon getting the tapes, and they went back and forth. Nixon did not want to comply with Cox, and he didn't, even though Cox kept persisting. So Nixon told his attorney general, Elliot Richardson, to fire Cox. Richardson denied did not want to do it, and he resigned. Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus was given the same order. He also resigned. Next in line was Solicitor General Robert Bork. Bork suddenly rises to acting Attorney General and fires Cox. Leon Chukovsky becomes a special prosecutor, and when the new Attorney General is sworn in, Robert Bork returns to his job as Solicitor General. Back as Solicitor General, sitting on his desk, is the Wiesenfeld case. He's the one who has to make the decision whether or not to appeal to the Supreme Court. So February 1974, Robert Bork makes this decision, and he decides that the district court is wrong and notifies the Supreme Court that, as Ginsburg had anticipated, he opposed the district court's ruling. So in the future, what happened to Robert Bork? Well, on July 1st, in 1987, so this is now 14 years later, President Reagan nominated Robert Bork for the Supreme Court, and he was denied the job. And one of the reasons might be what we were doing, what the Wiesenfeld case was about. And here's a small clip with Judith Lichtman, who was, I believe she was the Women's Legal Defense Fund, the head of the Women's Legal Defense Fund, and she is talking now at the Bork hearings.
Sex discrimination are really rather new. They're some 20 years old. Modern constitutional protections date back only to 1971. And therefore, the protections against providing, for instance, Social Security benefits to Mr. Wiesenfeld when his wife died in childbirth for their child, which the Social Security Administration had only provided for moms but not dads before the mid-70s, is something that we are extraordinarily sensitive. Those rights are fragile. They're newly won, and they're ones that we can't take risks with. And so when someone says, I have no quarrel with that, and then later says, in response to a later question late Friday afternoon to Senator DeConcini, in quote, I think that it's important that when I don't know where I stand on something, or I haven't reviewed it in detail, that it's best for me to take a step back and say, I have no reason to disagree with it, rather than saying I adopt it as mine. And that's what gives rise, it's that kind of statement that gives rise to the uncertainty, the fear of taking a risk. We can't afford to have unknowns about these important individual rights.
So that was part of the testimony that was not in favor of Robert Bork becoming a Supreme Court justice, and he didn't. 57 is an interesting piece of mail that I had gotten from Social Services Department of the City of New York, asking me to approve some things that they were writing that had to do with the Social Security laws, and this note from Diane just says, God knows what they're going to do if I object to any of this. So I just wanted to point out that I was not just a bystander here. I was really involved with the case and contributing when I can. All right, so I continue on at this point. There's number 58. It's some pictures of Jason as he turns 2 years old. And I continue to give newspaper articles and interviews and things like that. And NBC decided to do a 15-minute piece about me, and they were going to air it on August 8th, 1974. So this is after the three-judge federal court, but before we got to the Supreme Court. And they had me set up for August 8th, 1974 at 6:15. What happens on August 8th, 1974, when at 6 o'clock, Nixon takes over the airwaves and he decides to resign the presidency. And so my 15 minutes on that NBC station got switched to the next day. Well, as synchronicity, a word I've been using here to show you how things match up from 1 year to several years later, on August 25th, 2018, so this is now 34 years, 34 years later in time, I did a story, was supposed to do a live broadcast on CNN with Brooke Baldwin. And that was that was set for August 25th of 2018. On August 25th, 2018, I'm there at CNN studios in New York, and at 4:45 when my 15 minutes was supposed to start, and John McCain passed away. So I got preempted first by Nixon, and now I'm being preempted by John McCain. And then they said they would do it the next day, and that was August 26th. So we were there trying to get it done, and Aretha Franklin passed away, and she took over the airwaves. So it wasn't until Monday, or it was Thursday and Friday, it wasn't until Monday that I got to do my piece. Anyway, we're on our way to the Supreme Court, and one of the things that interesting synchronicity before we get to the Supreme Court, put up 58.2, please. This is after the Supreme Court, but it's an interesting story that I want to make sure that I get in here and talk about. A picture of Ruth and her husband Marty, and I'm standing on Ruth's left side, and on the far left side is Mimi Cecil. In Asheville, the big sightseeing thing is the Biltmore estate. Mimi Cecil's family is a direct descendant of George Washington Vanderbilt, who built the estate, and she and her family are now running the estate. The guy on the right is actually her attorney. She invited to come along. So when Ruth and Marty were visiting me, we decided to go to the Biltmore estate. And you'll notice that we were out doing some things in the early part of the day, and Marty and Ruth are dressed nicely. Marty's wearing a jacket and tie, and so I'm wearing a jacket and tie. And we show up at the Biltmore estate. Marty is not wearing the jacket and tie anymore. So I just mentioned to him that you're not wearing jacket and tie. You usually do. And he said, well, if you feel uncomfortable, said to me, if I feel uncomfortable, I should just take it off. So I did. After looking at the Biltmore estate, we went back to our own quarters for about an hour to refresh. And we met at Vincenzo's restaurant for dinner, and about 58.3. And here's a picture of the three of us at Vincenzo's restaurant. So when Marty walked into Vincenzo's restaurant, he was wearing a jacket and tie, and I had left my tie at home. So I commented to him that, well, now I'm not wearing a tie and you have a tie. So very graciously, he took his tie off, so we both would look alike. 58.4. Here's a letter that Ruth wrote to me, June 8th, 2018. This is 11 years later. Marty has since passed away, and I'm making a plan with Ruth to have dinner with her on August 1st when I'm going to be in Washington. And I told her to set up a restaurant reservation. And the second paragraph of that letter, she is writing to me, I'll reserve a table for August 1st dinner and send you the name of the restaurant and time later this month. And look at that last sentence in that paragraph. You won't need a coat or tie. She remembered the tie incident from so many years ago. So you see how things in our lives have meaning. And I thought this was pretty interesting that she remembered that, because her daughter and son, when they were teenagers, started writing a book called Mommy Laughing. And they were going to list all the times that they saw their mother laughed. And the book remained empty. There were no such times, but Ruth still had a sense of humor. And that's what something like this shows, that a sense of humor was more dry and deep. Not something, I guess, that you might laugh out loud at. But she was a very, very interesting and personable woman. Okay, what do you have up next? We made a change here. What's going on? Okay, so here's the newspaper for the Citizen Times from Asheville, where they were talking about Ruth coming and visiting Asheville. So there she is, and there I am in that picture. And we're going to go on now to number 59. All right, so here's something that is also interesting that she had done. And when I write letters, I always give the date, the time, and the weather forecast. And this letter from Laramie, Wyoming, that Ruth wrote to me, you could see up in the upper right-hand corner that she copies my style. She gives the date, the weather forecast, and the time. And then at the bottom, she also says something about being in Laramie, which I always made some comment in my letters about it, my immediate environment when I was writing. And Laramie was interesting because that's the first place to actually give women the vote. And she was there vacationing and giving a speech. Okay, so we're going to, you can put up one of her pictures if you want, or leave that up there. No, that sound clip yet. Unlike Reading Frontier, I'm reading a page here because I want to make sure I get this right. This is from Fred Streby's book. Unlike Reading Frontiero, Stephen Wiesenfeld was Ginsburg's client and had entered the case not for personal gain, but for principle that a woman's work should be worth as much as a man's. Wiesenfeld, she wrote to an associate in early 1973, presents no possibility of settlement short of declaration that the law is unconstitutional. By forcing the judges to look closely at Wiesenfeld, Ginsburg hoped to show that discrimination against either sex ultimately hurt both. As Wiesenfeld moved to the Supreme Court, she would get her chance. And we got notice from the court that the court date is going to be Monday, January 20th, 1975. So I was in Florida at the time. I drove to Washington. She was in New York. She drove to Washington. And Justice William O. Douglas was sick, and so there were only 8 justices sitting. So the night before, on January 19th, when we both were in Washington, she called and she's talking to me about the strategy that she was going to use the next day in court. And she said that she expects to get a 4-4 decision. A 4-4 decision of a split court, that means that the lower court's decision, whatever they decided, was going to hold. So the lower court gave us a 3-0 positive decision. And if she gets the 4-4 decision here, we will have one at the Supreme Court also, and she expected a 4-4, but she wanted to have some security. So she decided she was going to go after Potter Stewart's vote. And she told me she was going to do that by, when she makes her argument, she's going to use words similar to Potter Stewart's, so that he would recognize his own writings, words that she picked up from some decisions that he had written. And she was going to use these words back at him and be looking at him, and that way try and convince him to vote for her. So we meet at the Supreme Court on Monday, and we meet in time to have lunch, and we go to the lunchroom at the court, and she hardly eats anything, and she says that she never eats anything of consequence before appearing in court. Okay, so the next important thing is that I was seated at the table with her when we walked into court. She pointed out the chair. I should sit at the table with her. There's 2 people at the table, and she had never let anybody sit at that table with her, and hadn't done so afterward. I was the only one of her clients to sit at the table, and it's a big point. Evidently, it was very, very important, because a lot of people talk about the fact that I was the only person to sit at the table. It's in the RBG movie. Jeffrey Toobin, Poppy Harlow, Fred Strebe, others have talked about it, made a big deal out of the fact that I was sitting at that table. And in fact, play 66, please. Here's a point that in my own words when I was doing the Jeffrey Toobin podcast.
80s. In this 70s episode, we'll hear from Stephen Wiesenfeld and Sharon Cohen, whose gender discrimination cases RBG fought in front of the Supreme Court.
She sat me at the table with her. She had never before had a client sit at the table and hadn't done it afterward. I was the only client to ever sit there. I was not introduced, and she just wanted to show the 8 male justices what a male looked like when he was the plaintiff. She was looking for those 8 justices up there to know that there was a male plaintiff here, and we were talking about a male plaintiff. Okay, so what happened at the court? RBG, who was actually then known as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, knew that Wiesenfeld was a perfect way to show the justices how the double-edged sword operated in American law. At court, Ruth will show that a woman's work is considered worth less than a similarly situated male. She could do this and much more within the framework of the Wiesenfeld case. So now with an introduction by Laura Moxley, we're going to take a listen to Ruth Bader Ginsburg open her arguments at the Supreme Court. This piece is a little bit longer than the ones we've been listening to, but it is an introduction that prepares the court for what will follow. It's about 4.5 minutes, but I think that it's important, and I know a lot of people like listening to this because it actually points out how she's going to work the case. That sound piece is 68. Okay, I guess we can't find it. We'll have to skip it. We only have a short time left. So what she's saying is that the case works on 3 principles. First principle being that women's wages will now be worth less because they're paying money to the Social Security system, and there's no benefit to the money that she's paying in. So it's another economic problem heaped upon women. Heaped upon is a quote from the New York Times, making their wages actually be less than a man's similarly situated wages would be. So from the women's point of view, that succeeded at the Supreme Court. And there's a male point of view that extra little bit of money would help me be able to stay home and raise Jason. And then also point of view from the child is that the child would be entitled to the care of his sole surviving parent. So she brought these 3 arguments before the court, and the court ruled on every one of them. Justice Rehnquist being the one who thought that the child, because the child needs the care of his actual parent. So he voted in favor of us. We got an 8-0 decision, and Justice Rehnquist is the only time that he ever voted with Ruth Ginsburg. He never got his vote before that. All right, so while at the court, Justice Harry Blackmun expressed that it's unbelievable that a male would want to stay at home and care for a child. In fact, 90% of the government's argument concerned this very topic. Now there are 3 justices that appear appalled at what is being presented to them: Stewart, Powell, and Blackmun. As they all couldn't understand that a man would want to stay home and raise a child. As it turns out, not only the conservative justices, but their clerks and others listening thought it was impossible for a man to even think in terms of being a caregiver to a child. So here I am actually wanting to do it. And the justices were listening, and they were moved to a unanimous ruling stating that the Social Security laws were unconstitutional. So we actually won an 8-0 decision at the court. So through this thing, no judge ever voted against us. This decision was handed down March 19, 1975, and it was heard by a neighbor of mine on a radio broadcast who called me. It was about 11:30 in the morning, and told me that I had won the case. Hung up the phone with my neighbor, and CBS News, radio news was on the phone. They did a small interview. As soon as I hung up there, Ruth was on the phone calling me. She was driving someplace, and she stopped at a roadside phone booth. In 1975, they did not have cell phones. You actually stopped on a highway, had actual phone booths on it where you could make a call from. So she stopped on a highway, calls me, but I was not able to answer the question for her of how the justices ruled, because I didn't think of asking that of people I already spoke to. That 8-0 decision, she wanted to know that. And this is the only time that Rehnquist agreed with her. Can you play 77?
Justice Rehnquist also gave his vote to Ginsburg's side, but he wrote a separate concurrence. Remember that Justice Rehnquist was the sole dissenter in Frontiero and the sole dissenter in Taylor versus Louisiana. So Ginsburg was very proud of his vote in this case. His concurrence reasoned that this scheme hurt the child of the contributing worker. A few weeks after his...
Okay, so a little bit about Justice Rehnquist. He thought that it hurt the child, which of course was so. None of the other justices signed on to that. Well, the majority of justices signed on that to the first argument that women's wages were worth less. A few justices signed on to the second argument, which was if we should have it. Anyway, on that day, about an hour later, it's about getting close to 1 o'clock, and the doorbell starts ringing, and suddenly the house is swarming with reporters and news crews. And the last one didn't leave till 11 o'clock. 78 is just a photograph of Jason just about that particular time. So the Supreme Court ruled unanimously and agreed with Ruth and declares the Social Security system unconstitutional and orders it to be rewritten. She now has national standing, and we both become well known. And 87. And here is an invitation to the party that Ruth is throwing afterwards in her home in New York City. Her son James was there, and me and my son Jason. Jason is not yet 3 years old. James gave Jason a gift and helped entertain him. Many people were there who had contributed to helping in the case, along with several people from the ACLU. But really, I almost knew a lot of these names because I got copies of the letters and the phone calls. And other than Ruth, I really didn't know anybody there personally. But there is an important message from Lauren Moxley at number 43, not 43, 87.1, talking about the case. That's 87.1 is sound. You're too far ahead. Should be right there.
A few weeks after receiving the great news, Ginsburg had a party to celebrate the victory in Weinberger versus Wiesenfeld. Jason Paul, who was then 3, attended the party, and Ginsburg was so obviously fond of these clients. After the party, she wrote a letter to Stephen, telling him just how proud he should be of Jason Paul. Even after the case wrapped, Ginsburg and the Wiesenfeld family stayed in close touch. Ginsburg gave Jason Paul advice as he was applying to law schools and later became an attorney. And she even performed Stephen Wiesenfeld's wedding when he got married after 40 years of bachelorhood in the Supreme Court.
Okay, so there's a little bit there about Ruth, and actually she was a very, very wise and caring individual. So by 1978, Ruth had taken 6 cases before the Supreme Court, winning 5 of them. But things had changed. What happened that made them change? Well, many things changed, but the one big one was Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the new Women's Rights Project at the ACLU. From 1972 to 1978, just 6 years, Ruth waged a war, a careful, understated war. The goal of the war was straightforward: to prove that laws that discriminated on the basis of sex should be held to a higher standard under the United States Constitution. In just 6 years, RBG actually taught the 9 justices the conservative Burger Court about the ways in which American law operated to exclude women and pigeonhole them, to hold back, and therefore to hold all of us back. She made arguments that had never been made before, and she won over an all-male jury, all-male Supreme Court, to her vision of the United States Constitution. She was quite a woman, I'm sure you know that, and was able to do all that. All right, so Ruth is, in 1993, Ruth is nominated by President Clinton to the Supreme Court. And my son is about that time thinking of law school. On July 20th, 1993, Ruth answers questions from the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Edward Kennedy is interviewing Ruth and asks about me and Jason. And this is what she says. 117 is the sound, 118 the photograph.
Yes, and I'm pleased to say that Jason, who I don't think was yet 3 when at the time of the Supreme Court victory, is now in his last year in college, and his father tells me he's going to apply to law school.
So this is being televised on television stations, radio stations. So PBS is carrying this, and Jason's friends are all listening, as well as Jason. And she's saying to the whole nation that Jason is, we how to do that. All right. Then we have number 119 and 120. 119 is Ruth at Columbia University. She was invited there in December. She's on a panel discussion group, and this is what she says.
Objective. And the baby in that story is today in his last year of college and has recently applied to Columbia Law School. It is, of course, at the very top of his choices of law schools.
All right, so this is how you get your son to do something that he may have resisted before. But Jason wasn't resisting. He actually wanted to go to law school, and of course now he's kind of like forced to go to Columbia Law School, and he does. You know, he had graduated from Columbia Law School, and it was just everybody hearing that he was going there. And I guess I don't know if he felt compelled to go there or not, but he was happy going there. All right, so it's getting to be time up. Emma, are there questions there? Can Emma hear me?
Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
So we do have a few questions. If you would like to, if you have any more slides that you want to show us before we jump into the Q&A, please feel free. We do have a couple minutes left, and I'd like to invite everybody in the audience. If you have any questions for Stephen, please send them through the chat or through the Q&A function, and I will ask them right away. Thank you so much.
I had met Ruth, and this is her family. This is her son and her granddaughter from Jane. Jane is her daughter. Jane and her family isn't here except for Clara that's there. This is her son James and his wife and her two sons by a former husband, and two daughters that James had by a former wife. James is married to this woman. His name is Patricia Brown, and she's an opera singer. And you know that opera runs in that family. Ruth loves opera. She always goes to opera festivals wherever she goes. James owns a record company in Chicago and records a lot of stuff. And we were at a conference center where Ruth was talking, and she invited me to go along. That her family was going to be there. Okay, what do you got next that's on the list there? Anything more? Okay, this is a picture that I wanted to get to before when I said slide 151. This is the Ruth was going to marry my wife, my current wife, Elaine, and that's her on the left there. And marry us at the Supreme Court, and this is 2014. And this is the night before the wedding. This is the first time that my wife Elaine and Ruth Bader Ginsburg are meeting. And as soon as we walk into the room, Ruth comes out from behind her desk and gives Elaine a great big hug and says Mazel Tov to her. And that shows you how what a warm person she really is. And she always hugs me all the time. Also, as well, any time that we're together. And she was very, very happy, very fond. We're both very fond of, we're very fond of each other. So you can keep running the slides, and I'll just talk about them. So this is a ceremony that she's standing behind the podium there, and Elaine and I are getting married, and our two children are there on the left, and my son is peeking out from behind my head out there. Go ahead. Next. This is after the service was taking place. Ruth and Elaine and I were posing for pictures, and so this is the first one was a picture of the three of us. Next. Okay, so here are two things together. This is Elaine and Ruth that's behind her desk, and she is signing all the pieces of information. This is my grandson, my son's youngest child, and he feels perfectly comfortable jumping on the furniture in Ruth's office. And this is not his first time there, but he's doing that. Okay, go on. All right, so after we do the wedding, we all go to the National Gallery and for lunch. So after lunch, some of the guests were coming along and taking pictures with Ruth. And that's Ruth's friend, and she actually lives near Washington. And she brought, at Elaine's request, brought and placed orchids on all the tables. Elaine loves orchids, and placed orchids on all the tables. And at the end of the ceremony and then end of the lunch, she asked Ruth if she wanted to take the orchids home because nobody else lived in Washington. Nobody else could take them home. And I think there were probably half a dozen of them there. And Ruth had the U.S. Marshals carry the orchids to her car. And the U.S. Marshals would carry out the orchids. And she wrote thank you notes later on, talking about the orchids. I don't know if you have it there on the next slide. This is the Washington Post. The Washington Post did this full-page story. This picture is from back in 1973 or so. Riding bicycle, and there's Jason on the back, and it appeared in many newspapers in 1973 or 4, and so they put it into the Washington Post after we got married, and Barnes did a story about it, and so there we are again in a picture in the Washington Post. Go on, next one. Okay, here's a letter that Ruth had handwritten to us, and she says, the orchid plants are still blooming with no signs of fading. It has been good to have them around in the harsh labor of the past few weeks. Just one more term just one more go, and it's right turn. I can't actually see the letter because it's not blown up enough when I'm looking at it. Okay, so that's a letter there talking us, thanking us for giving her the orchids. All right. I guess that's the end of the slides that you have.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I know
you're very welcome. I enjoyed this. Because I wish I got to talk to the audience and see their reactions and things like that. I was going along.
Well, I can tell you that a few people have said in the chat that they really enjoyed all of the photos that you showed and the personal anecdotes. So,
good.
So yeah, so I know that it's been a really good time for me. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we've enjoyed what you've had to say. Now, Stephen, would you mind if I ask you a few questions from our audience?
I'm waiting for them. Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, we got one question asking, what is Jason doing now? Is he practicing law?
Jason is not practicing law. He actually practiced law for about 2 years and then decided to go to work for Goldman Sachs and wealth management. So he's now doing wealth management, and probably wouldn't have gotten a job at Goldman Sachs if he didn't have the law degree, because they hire people that all have wonderful educations. So he's working at Goldman Sachs is what he's doing now.
I hope he's enjoying it very much.
He loves it. He loves it. He travels a lot. He's out of the office frequently and flies several times a week, all place. And Elaine is whispering to him to say that I'm very proud of him, which I was about to say. I'm very proud of what he's accomplished and all he's done. Yeah, he has 3 kids of his own.
That's great.
Yeah.
This is going to be a bit of a segue, Stephen. So instead of asking you another question about Jason, I wanted to ask you a question about Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
That's not that. Your sound isn't coming across.
Oh, can you hear me now, Stephen?
It's clearer now. Yes.
Thank you. So if there is one greatest lesson that you learned from the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg over the course of your decades of friendship, what would you say that it was?
Well, what Ruth's greatest lesson was through her life came from her mother-in-law, Marty's mother, the night before she got married. And what the mother-in-law said to her is, always be a lady. And naturally that transverses to me, and it's really always be a gentleman. And I think that's what she professed all the time. She always talked about that particular lesson that she learned from Marty's mother. And she expands on it a little bit with sometimes it's a good idea to be a little deaf. Not to react to other people when they react one way or the other. One question that I get very frequently that I thought would be on the top of the list here today was who paid for the case? Who paid for this case to go before the Supreme Court? And this happens to be a very interesting answer, because there were 2 main benefactors that paid for the case, aside from what the ACLU put in. It was the Ford Foundation and also the Playboy Foundation. So I find it very interesting that the Playboy Foundation contributed to this case.
Do you know why they decided to contribute to this case?
Well, if you were around when the Playboy philosophy was being written by Hugh Hefner, you would see that even though he published pictures in his magazine, but his philosophy was almost the same as Ruth's philosophy about gender-based discrimination. He wanted the genders to do things consistently together, and not to have separate roles. She wanted society to be more homogeneous. And that's one thing that Ruth always wanted also. She wanted a homogeneous society where both men and women share the household chores and household duties and raising children. And it's moving in that direction very rapidly. We know many couples, young couples having children where the father is much more involved than they used to be 50 years ago.
That's really interesting. I never knew that about Hugh Hefner. Thank you, Stephen.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
In that vein, I have a bit of a follow-up question. So that's who funded it, but I'm wondering what motivated you to stay with this case all the way to the Supreme Court?
I really had a great curiosity to find out how the government would answer the question I had. It really is, what did you do with the money that my late wife Paula paid into the system? If it doesn't have any value to support her family, where's the money? What did you do with it? They can't answer the question because the money really just went into the general fund, and the question really doesn't have a direct answer. But I was very curious about that. I wanted to know, and also the process was fascinating, and I knew that it would be, and I knew that I wanted to do it, and also, which I didn't talk about, which I should have talked about in the preamble or the preface, was that Paula had wanted to go on to get her PhD. She already had a master's degree, wanted to go on to get a PhD in education, and eventually be a principal or something high up in the school system. She had a desire to do that, and I kind of like the idea of having a consulting business, and I could work from home and things like that if I wanted to. That's just some younger thoughts that I had, and take care of the child. The problem with wanting to do that kind of thing, of course, would be that computers came along and they require special environments and things like that. And no matter what I was doing, I was always working with computers. So even when I had the small business that when I was when Paula had passed away, that I eventually sold, that was a computer-based business. I had to sell not just the business, I had to sell the computers. I really found somebody wanted to buy the computers, and then told them how to handle the clients that I was giving them at the same time. So everything I did had to do with computers. Okay, any more? You're stuck.
Thank you, Stephen. We just got a new question in the Q&A that's about Ruth Bader Ginsburg again, and a little bit about your relationship and what you knew about her. So somebody in our audience is wondering, for such a giant in every way, was she naturally so thin, or did she follow a particular diet or exercise?
Lost you again.
Sorry?
Just something wrong with your speech.
Can you hear me now, Stephen?
Can't hear you. Can't hear. Okay, now I can hear you. I don't know what's different, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a giant, and somebody wanted to know what?
Yes. Was she naturally so thin, or did she follow a particular diet or exercise regimen?
Well, she was naturally thin. She hardly ever ate. I didn't see her ever eat a full plate of food. Sometimes she would move it around on her table, but she was naturally thin and naturally. She's a very small woman, small boned, and that's you can't maintain that kind of weight. Probably less than 100 pounds.
I do know that later in her life that she trained with Bryant Stevenson, who is a former Navy SEAL, and he actually published the RBG workout, which is a book that you can find in the Maltz Museum gift store if you're interested in learning to work out just like the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Stephen, we only have. Sorry, go ahead.
She needed to do that workout because she needed to get exercise. You know, the regiment that she had, she was staying up late at night, getting up early in the morning and working. She slept very little, and sometimes 11 o'clock at night, Marty would come down to the Supreme Court to push her to get home and to have some dinner before she went to bed. So she was a workaholic and was constantly working, and wasn't getting enough exercise, and she knew that. And so along comes a gentleman who helped her exercise a couple of times, maybe 3 times. I don't know how many times a week she was doing it, just 3 times a week, maybe.
Thank you, Stephen. So we have a couple of last questions. We have time for 2 more, I think. So the first one is from an anonymous attendee in our audience asking, why did Justice Douglas abstain from voting in your case, if you happen to know?
Justice Douglas didn't abstain. Justice Douglas wasn't there. He was sick. He missed the entire term. He was sick when the term began in October, and I don't think he ever showed up at that court again. He was just sick. I mean, maybe they call that abstaining, that he was sick, but that's why he wasn't there. He wasn't practicing.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Well, thank you for clearing that up for us. And so my very last question for you, Stephen, tonight, before I thank you for your time and thank everybody for joining us tonight, is to ask,
thank you.
For you, what was the most meaningful element of your experience as a Supreme Court plaintiff?
Just the entire process of how things work and how things went along. Yeah, I was really part of everything that was going on. I received copies of all the notes and the briefs and things like that were being filed, and it's to a layperson, as far as the law was concerned, there is so much that goes on that the attorney who is doing a good job is constantly doing research, writing briefs, and looking for ways to improve her arguments. Ruth was running a class at Columbia University, and the class actually prepared most of the documents before to go to the Supreme Court. They prepared, she edited and spiffed them up. But she had a classroom full of young ladies helping her. That also interested me, that she had got the class to do a lot of the brief writing when they weren't yet attorneys. They were learning how and how much more can you do to actually do something that's being used and something that is real, instead of something that was just made up and you had to write a brief for something that was just a story. So the process is what fascinated me. And that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to keep going on. But also I knew that I had to make certain changes in my life to go on. So what happened to me is that after the case came down, I sold that retail business that I had, and I actually stayed home and raised Jason until he was old enough to come home from school, let himself in, carrying his own key, let himself in, and stay in the house for a couple of hours without being upset. And that happened when he was about 9 years old. So in 1981, Jason would be 9 years old, and I went back into business for myself as a consultant, working again with the advances made in computers, but this time as a sole proprietor, and became very successful almost immediately, because I was writing software for the microcomputers, microprocessors, and such things didn't exist yet. These microprocessors first came out in 19 was the Apple, and 1982 was the IBM. So I was sort of in the bottom part of that industry, and wrote software for those microprocessors, which was lucrative stuff. But I worked from home. I never went to an office. I worked from home. I was always home when Jason came home, except if I was out seeing a client.
What a great answer.
I want to thank you for the time that you're allowing me to do this, and I really had a good time. Now, this original thing for the audience benefits, original thing that I did research for, took about 6 hours to tell it all to you. I really was cutting it down to about an hour, which means I left out a lot of stuff, a lot of interesting things, more anecdotes, more stories. But I cut it down to an hour, and I managed to do it in an hour. So thank you all.
I cannot thank you enough for your time, Stephen, and thank you so much for coming with us today to share your stories and share your experiences. I want
to thank you for the help that you gave me in going along and doing this.
I was happy to do it.
Very nice. Well, thank you. I'm happy to do it also.
I would like to thank our audience for being here tonight as well. And I'd like to remind everybody, if you enjoyed tonight's talk, you are welcome to join us again in August for our next virtual gallery talk. when Jonathan Enton, a former law clerk of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and an emeritus professor at Case Western Reserve University, will be giving a talk on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's early career on August 11th. You can find more information about that and other upcoming programs on our website, www.maltzmuseum.org. Thank you all tonight for being here. Thank you again,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody.